Welcome to the Partis channel. Today, we explain Leviticus chapter 25 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're picking up the text right at Mount Sinai. The Israelites have just been freed from Egypt, and God is handing down the exact laws that are going to govern their brand new society once they enter the Promised Land. Now, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine an entire national economy just hitting pause. I'm talking no farming, no harvesting, and absolutely no debt collection, just a total standstill. Well, that's exactly what God is delivering to the Israelites here. This chapter introduces one of the most fascinating, radical, and honestly profound socioeconomic systems ever written down. It is literally a mandatory society-wide reset button. By the time we finish this explainer, you'll see how this single chapter completely redefines the way we are supposed to view time, property, wealth, and human dignity.
So we're going to break this down into 5 simple parts. First, we'll look at the Sabbath year, and then see how that scales up into the massive Jubilee year. After that, we'll get into the specifics of property and redemption, followed by the incredibly strict rules around poverty and servitude. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with some practical life lessons. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Sabbath year, covering verses 1 through 7.
The text starts off with a very clear, uncompromising command to Moses. For 6 years, the Israelites are supposed to work hard. They sow their fields, prune their vineyards, gather their crops, business as usual, right? But then comes the 7th year. In year 7, the land itself gets a Sabbath, a complete and absolute rest dedicated to the Lord. In Hebrew tradition, this is known as the Shemitah, which basically means a release or a letting go. So you literally have to put down the plow and stop pruning. You're not allowed to formally harvest your fields or gather grapes from your untended vines. But here's the catch. The land is still going to produce something naturally, right? So what happens to that food? Well, the text is super specific here. Whatever grows on its own becomes free food for everybody. And I mean everyone. It's not just the wealthy landowner who gets to eat. The text explicitly says this food is for you, your male and female servants, your hired hands, temporary residents, and get this, even your livestock and the wild animals. Think about what a profound social equalizer this is. For one entire year, the whole concept of private agricultural property is just suspended. The richest landowner and the poorest servant are walking out to the exact same uncultivated field and picking fruit from the exact same bush. The land feeds everyone equally. Now, before we jump ahead, let's look at how the text deals with a very real, very human anxiety later down in verse 20. God pauses to address the most obvious, practical question any farmer would ask. Wait, what are we going to eat in the 7th year if we don't plant or harvest anything? And honestly, that is a completely fair fear to have. In an agrarian society, if you don't work the land, you don't eat. How could an entire nation just stop farming for a year without totally starving? Well, the text addresses this panic head-on in verses 21 and 22 with an amazing guarantee. God promises to send such a massive blessing in the 6th year that the crop yield will be enough for 3 entire years. Let's break down the math on this because it's incredibly specific and really cool. Why 3 years? Okay, so in the 6th year, you're eating that year's current harvest. Then comes the 7th year, the Shemitah, where the land rests, so you're surviving on the surplus you stored up from year 6. Now, in the 8th year, you finally get to plant your seeds again, but crops take a whole season to grow, so you're actually still eating the leftovers from year 6 all the way through year 8, until the brand new harvest finally rolls in during the 9th year. It's a system that requires an immense amount of trust. It shifts the entire society from relying on human control to completely relying on divine provision. Moving on to Section 2, the Jubilee year. Let's jump back to verse 8 and see what happens when you take this 7th year concept and scale it up. In verses 8 and 9, the Israelites are told to count off 7 Sabbaths of years, so 7 cycles of 7 years. 7 times 7 equals 49 years. You can see how this creates a really deep, rhythmic view of time. Then, verse 9 drops a massive detail. On the 10th day of the 7th month, a loud trumpet, a shofar, is to be sounded everywhere, all throughout the land. And the text specifically points out that this is the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Now, why blow the trumpet on that exact day? Because the Day of Atonement is the ultimate day of spiritual forgiveness. It's the day the slate is wiped clean between humanity and God. And that perfectly mirrors the incredible economic forgiveness and the societal clean slate that is about to hit the entire nation. That trumpet blast changes everything. It ushers in the 50th year. If you thought the 7th year was a big deal, year 50 is the ultimate, society-wide reset button. Verses 10 through 19 lay out the ground rules for the Jubilee.
In Hebrew, it's called the Yovel, which actually refers to the ram's horn that was blown. In this holy 50th year, a massive declaration is made. First, the text says to proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. The Hebrew word used for liberty here is dror. It paints this beautiful picture of a bird just flying freely, going wherever it wants with no restrictions. Second, everyone gets to return to their original family property and their own clan. Now, just like the 7th year, there's absolutely no sowing or reaping. You survive solely on what the land yields directly. But the Jubilee goes way farther. Verses 14 through 17 lay down strict rules against exploiting people financially. Because all the land automatically goes back to its original family in the Jubilee year, the price of buying a piece of land has to be calculated fairly. It's based entirely on how many harvest years are left until that 50th year. You literally cannot overcharge your neighbor. This whole section closes out in verses 18 and 19 with a reminder. Fear God, keep his decrees, and you'll live safely and eat to the full. Okay, Section 3, Property and Redemption. Let's look at verses 23 through 34 to see how this radical system actually functioned on a practical economic level.
Verses 23 and 24 hit us with the core theological anchor of the whole chapter. Why is it illegal to sell land permanently? Because, as God plainly states, humans don't actually own it. God says, the land is mine. The Israelites are just described as aliens and tenants living on God's property. So if an Israelite falls on hard times and has to sell his land, he's not actually selling the dirt. He's really just leasing out the harvest until the Jubilee rolls around. And to add another layer of protection, verses 25 through 28 introduce the kinsman redeemer, the Goel in Hebrew. If a guy goes broke and sells his property, his closest relative is legally obligated to step in and buy it back for him. If he doesn't have a relative to do it, but he ends up making some money later, he can buy it back himself at a prorated cost. And if he's totally broke and can't afford it at all, no problem. The buyer keeps it until the Year of Jubilee, and then it automatically goes right back to the original owner, free and clear.
Now, verses 29 through 34 make a really fascinating distinction about real estate. There are different rules depending on where your house is. If you sell a house inside a walled urban city, you have exactly 1 full year to change your mind and buy it back. If you don't, that sale is permanent forever. It does not go back to you in the Jubilee. But houses in unwalled villages, totally different story. They were considered part of the open country, essentially tied directly to the farming land. So they could always be redeemed, and they always went back to the original family at the Jubilee. Oh, and there's a special exception for the Levites. Since the tribe of Levi didn't get their own big territory of farmland and only lived in assigned towns, their houses were their only inheritance. Because of that, Levitical houses always kept the right of redemption and always returned to them in the Jubilee. It's an incredible system. It allowed for commercial wealth in cities to be traded freely, but ensured that rural families would never become permanently landless. Next up, Section 4, Poverty and Servitude. In verses 35 through 55, the text deals with the very real human cost of economic failure. Verses 35 through 38 lay out some serious social safety nets. The Hebrew here literally translates to, if your brother becomes poor and his hand falters. It's this vivid image of someone losing their grip, just slipping down an economic cliff. The very first line of defense is the community. You are commanded to help him. Sustain him like you would a temporary resident so he can keep living alongside you. And the economic rules here are strict. You cannot charge him any interest on a loan, no usury. You can't lend him money to make a profit, and you can't sell him food at a profit either. This was a radical departure from how surrounding ancient nations did business. You are flat out forbidden from profiting off the desperation of your neighbor. But what happens if the poverty gets so bad that an Israelite literally has to sell himself just to survive? Verses 39 through 46 draw a very clear line between 2 different statuses. If an Israelite sells himself to you, the text commands, do not make him work as a slave. You have to treat him as a hired worker. The text literally warns, you shall not rule over him ruthlessly. He keeps his full dignity as a citizen, and importantly, he and his children are automatically released in the Year of Jubilee to go back to their clan. The text contrasts this specifically with foreign slaves purchased from other nations who could be kept permanently as inherited property. But an impoverished Israelite citizen, they were completely protected from lifelong chattel slavery. Verses 47 through 54 give us the exact mathematical formulas to make sure no Israelite is trapped in debt servitude for a second longer than necessary. Even if an Israelite sells himself to a wealthy foreigner living in the land, he still has the right of redemption. It works in 3 ways. Step 1, a relative, an uncle, a cousin, whoever in his clan, can step in, pay the debt, and buy his freedom. Step 2, if the guy eventually prospers, he can buy his own freedom. The price is strictly calculated based on the wages of a hired man multiplied by the exact number of years left until the Jubilee. And step 3, even if neither of those things happen, he is automatically freed, along with his kids, in the Year of Jubilee. Under no circumstances can he be held past year 50.
So why this fierce, uncompromising protection for the poor? Verse 42 gives us the ultimate answer, and it brings it up again in verse 55. God reminds them of their history. He says, "They are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt." Think about the logic here. You can't truly own these people because God already bought them. He personally redeemed them from slavery in Egypt. Because of that, they belong exclusively to the Creator. They cannot be sold as permanent slaves because their freedom was already purchased. God holds the ultimate deed, not just to the land, but to the people themselves. Finally, Section 5, Practical Life Lessons. Let's boil these ancient agrarian laws down to some simple, practical ideas we can actually use. We might not live in an ancient farming society, but the moral architecture of this chapter is incredibly relevant today. First, we learn that we are stewards, not owners. Everything we have, our money, our resources, ultimately belongs to God. We're just managing it for a little while. Second, the Sabbath year is a huge lesson in trusting provision over endless labor. It completely rejects the modern idea that our worth is tied to how much we produce. Taking time to rest is a real declaration of trust. Third, treat workers with absolute dignity. Even if someone is drowning in debt, they never lose their fundamental humanity. Fourth, do not exploit the vulnerable. When someone is slipping down that economic cliff, you don't price gouge them, you don't hit them with predatory lending. The community's job is to catch them. And finally, the Jubilee teaches us that everyone deserves a fresh start. Society should be built so that generational poverty doesn't become a permanent trap. I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. What if we actually applied this Jubilee mindset to our modern lives? What if we started viewing everything we own as merely on loan to us, entrusted to our care, just so we can be a blessing to others? It completely changes how we spend, how we give, and how we look at the people around us. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.